Welcome to Victoria Rumble Room, an island show that likes to cast a net on issues right across the country, around the globe, and talk about things that people are commonly discussing around the water cooler or down at the local Starbucks. I'm Robin Adair, and with me, as always, my fully caffeinated co-host with the most, John Jurisic. And John, fascinating to see all the things that have been percolating as we march along the election trail.
So many issues, so many things. One of them being housing. Never goes away, Robin. David Eby government brought in new legislation to kill short-term Airbnb rentals this spring. And boy, did they kill it. By all accounts, this move has had almost zero impact on the housing shortage, but has caused a ton of grief amongst the owners of these properties who bought them in good faith. We asked David Schneider, our resident wealth manager and financial planner who has been following this issue, if there's any chance the government might take a second look.
Oh, I think they're going to be making all kinds of changes. Look at the recent polls where the Conservatives are making some really good headway. They just made the change on the eviction notice for tenants in buildings because it just didn't match up with real estate deals. So that just happened. I could see that there was a lot of front page stories of the tourism numbers, especially in the Okanagan. That was where people right away knew where families would go for 3-4 weeks in the Okanagan. They don't want to stay in a hotel. They want to stay in an Airbnb. And you knew it was going to be painful. And now the numbers are coming out, which are extremely painful. And you looked at, I always would look at in the past few weeks, hotel costs here in Victoria, and you're looking at some of the hotel costs along the gorge and just going, you wonder why people aren't coming here. It just doesn't make sense. And I think, the issue that also isn't talked about is people's property rights. Here they are attacked. You buy something with good intentions based on law, and then all of a sudden with the stroke of a pen, it can change. And I just don't think that's correct. So I think they're making a lot of changes because it's hurt a lot of people. It's hurting tourism. And I think what really bothers me is organizations like Tourism Victoria agreeing with it. Well, sorry, you have half the board of Tourism Victoria are hotel people. Talk about conflict of interest. Mm-hmm. That really bothered me. Even the chamber made comments of supporting the move. And I think that's what we have issues with a lot of our organizations in town where they don't look at the big picture.
David, so even though we've been talking about the economy all interview, my final question is about the economy, but from an election political issue, a focus. Some years, the economy, deficits, and the cost of living are the biggest issues as we head into an election. I recall multiple elections where deficit was literally the largest issue on the voters' minds. But this fall, we're hearing a lot more about rising crime, the cost of homes, affordability, healthcare system in crisis. Should we be worried about the economy when we vote this fall? Are we going to default to it's the economy, stupid?
Yeah, I think we're going to be following what happens in the States where it comes down to the economy. That's was a tradition in the United States is their wallet. No, this has been a significant change the last 4 years since COVID. The decisions that were made, the inflation that generated because of it. People are seeing the bloated governments at all three levels. People know, and there's pain out there. There's pain to stay alive in terms of day-to-day needs. There was this past week that big article about how we're paying more taxes than necessities in Canada. It's getting scary, and I think people are also seeing the crime in the neighborhood, the problems downtown, the access to healthcare, all kinds of things. They're young, their kids, their grandkids not able to really make it. There's a lot of despair out there. And, I think that is why you see Mr. Rustad and the Conservatives making such headway, because people see the pain with, hate to say it, with left-wing policies that just don't work.
Always great to hear from David Schneider. We'll have more from him on what's going on with the stock market and what's happening with the Canadian economy, the housing market. He's got lots of good insight on that, so we'll have more comments from him. And always good to hear what's going on in the stock market, eh, John?
Well, it sure is. It's such a profound indicator of where the hell we're going. Economy is always a hot topic when we get close to an election. Really, it should always be the topic. Anytime, you can be sure the EB government will be talking up their fiscal management, for whatever that is, while taking lots of shots from the BC Conservatives, the BC United, and the BC Greens. Tim Tillman has been particularly active on the economy in general and the whole fight around these short-term rentals.
And Tim Tillman has been particularly active on social media, which we find very interesting, extremely proactive. He's in a tough fight. He's against Grace Lohr, a cabinet minister in Victoria, Beacon Hill. You have to regard that as a fairly safe NDP seat. But he is waging a battle there, and he is speaking out now about what seniors are experiencing after they originally bought Airbnbs, short-term rentals in good faith, and then had the government basically pull the rug out.
See, he was a senior. He, through a workplace injury, lost his ability to earn an income. So he and his wife purchased a condo in downtown Victoria, around here. They started renting it out to other seniors, to nurses, many others. And they loved it. They absolutely loved it. They borrowed against the first one and got a second. Both of them in downtown Victoria, both of them zoned for short-term rentals, legal non-conforming use. I asked him why, and he said, I like to sleep at night. I like to play by the rules. Little did he know that meanwhile, the Premier was changing those rules and had gotten in bed with the hotel lobby to cook up a study to blame somebody for the housing crisis that had overtaken the province over the last 6-10 years.
The Conservatives are also taking aim at these huge issues of street safety, drugs, homelessness. In fact, they sponsored a virtual town hall this past week, featuring Tim Tillman and utilizing the considerable MC talents of former Councillor Stephen Andrew, who we've had on our show numerous times. It's interesting to see so many candidates using the internet as their major campaign tool.
It's right across the board. All the parties are utilizing it, and some candidates are really jumping on board. And it's fascinating to see how elections are changing as we move forward. And that's not just in British Columbia, so not even Canada. It's right around the globe. We see it in vivid display in the United States right now as information is being passed on to many people exclusively on things like Twitter, also known as X, Facebook, Instagram, you name it, TikTok, people getting all their information. Newspapers and television, their viewership is still there, but it isn't rising, and there are certain segments of our population that don't look to that for their information. So they need to look elsewhere in terms of politicians getting in front of the public, and the internet seems to be the place they're doing that. We thought we'd dig into this phenomena, John, a little bit deeper.
Yeah, I am so in love with this topic. I've been involved with digital media for far too long. And so great to talk about it. And, you know, the best way to show what's happening and what you just described is to look at how a major election is being run from an internet perspective and also from a safe distance. I'm talking about the U.S. presidential election. The way American political parties and politicians stage their events, the way they use catchphrases, the way Americans embrace identity politics, us versus them, left against right, urban, rural, moral, immoral. You get the picture.
Absolutely, we all do, and we see it in vivid reflection right across Canada as well. It seems like there's a lot of the same kind of trends happening north of the border that we see all the time now in this election campaign as we work up to November and the U.S. presidential election. And so we thought it would be interesting to dig in deeper on the U.S. system, because we're watching it anyway, because it's a great way to reflect on what are we picking up from that? What are we seeing in the United States and the way they run an election campaign that we are now adopting, clearly adopting? And you can see it very vividly in the way that some politicians speak, the catchphrases, the way the campaigns run. So we turn to Dr. Jim King, who was a fairly recently retired professor from the University of Wyoming. He taught for 30 years the U.S. electoral system, the U.S. presidential system, and the mechanisms behind the American way of life, really, but certainly the way Americans vote and how they go to the polls. And we thought that would be fascinating for a little chit-chat, so let's zoom in, Dr. Jim King. And now joining us from the great state of Colorado, in fact, Fort Collins to be exact, is Dr. Jim King. And Jim, so great to have you here in the Rumble Room.
Well, thank you. I appreciate the invitation.
So right off the top, have you ever spoken to a Canadian audience before?
I've not spoken to a Canadian audience, but I have been interviewed by Canadian newspapers for various stories on politics. In particular, 2 years ago, when Liz Cheney was running for re-election, there was a lot of attention on the Wyoming political scene, and there were reporters from all over the place expressing interest.
That's great. Well, we'll try to match their level of journalism here, and we've got lots of good questions because there's so much going on. I think rich terrain for somebody who is a former political science professor and somebody who's spent years studying the presidency and the election system in the United States. And we're talking about the reemergence of Donald Trump. We're talking about the departure of Joe Biden. We're talking about Kamala Harris. I mean, are these things, were they anticipated? Are you surprised about all these things that have rapidly taken place?
Not surprised that we had for a while, a Biden-Trump rematch. Biden indicated very early he would seek re-election, as most first-term presidents do. And Trump indicated very early that he would seek the Republican nomination again. So, this was something that for 3 years had been on the boiler, sometimes the front boiler, sometimes the back one, but it had been there. And all of a sudden, things changed dramatically. Just a little more than a month ago with the presidential debate in which, very few people would say that Biden distinguished himself in that debate. And then the dominoes as they started falling over the next few weeks.
Jim, it's fantastic to get insight from someone who's carefully studied U.S. politics. We very much appreciate that. In Canada, we watch this stuff, frankly, with fascination, some wonderment, but we don't always understand or get the motivations for Americans to vote one way or another. So in your opinion, your estimation, what exactly motivates Republicans today? For example, is it potentially distrust of globalization, immigration? What charges people up to vote for a Donald Trump?
Well, I think Trump has tapped into a strain within the American electorate that is concerned about changes in American society. And, in some ways, he's tapping into the same vein of the electorate that Ronald Reagan did, that George W. Bush did. And to some extent, you could go back even further in time to 1968 and Richard Nixon. People who felt the system had passed them by, felt that they were being disadvantaged by no actions of their own, tapped into, to some extent, I don't like the word especially, but to some extent, a resentment against the way things are going. And that then plays it out in so many ways. Immigration is a very easy target, for people in that circumstance. And so you see this, historically, Republican Party had been the, party of business. And, since the earlier parts of the 20th century, the Democratic Party had been the party of labor and kind of the middle class. And there's been a lot of shifting going on in the last 50 years that has come to be emphasized in a different way with Donald Trump. He is tied into that very, very explicitly. That you are the ones who are being cheated. I'm your champion. I will stop you from being cheated. And that has played well. You see this repeatedly, that the people who feel disaffected are the ones who are most enthusiastic about Trump's candidacy.
So, how do you overcome that? We have a vice president now who, let's face it, in the American system, vice presidents have a lot of trouble shining and looking really prominent. It all goes towards the presidency, and they're the support act, so they have to step forward, and she has to do it so quickly, Kamala Harris. I mean, how does she reach out to the American people and bring them on board that she can be that difference maker? I realize she's identified as somebody who is mixed race. She's a woman, so there's disadvantages there. Is that something they can rally behind, or do you think there's still a lot of difficulty for a lot of mainstream Americans to vote for someone who is mixed race and is a woman?
I mean, I think there's still that element in American society, but I don't know that it is playing out in specifically those terms. Yes, she's the child of immigrants, but legal immigrants. And that's something that very often gets mixed. You see people that when they talk about immigration and the problems, they're really talking about illegal immigration. After all, Donald Trump's in-laws are legal immigrants and naturalized citizens. So, I mean, there's a lot of people who have immigrated to the country. It's that question of illegal immigration that causes so much concern. Now, in terms of Harris, I mean, she's tapping into very traditional Democratic constituencies, at least traditional over the last 30, 40 years. The classic, if you will, middle class, people who identify as people of color or with other than a Western European ethnicity, are going to see something that she would understand perhaps their circumstances better than Donald Trump or J.D. Vance. There are a lot of issues out there that come into play here. Abortion has been an issue in American politics for 50 years. The Roe decision that triggered so much of this debate came down 51 years ago and immediately started being a question in elections. And of course, the last 2 years since the Dobbs decision has revitalized that pro-choice movement and to some extent the anti-abortion movement as well. And so you've got an issue that has kind of boiled a little bit, now boiling over, if you will. And again, you've got this immigration issue, a lot of other things. This question of the economy right now. Any candidate, for the presidency or vice presidency, have to talk about the economy. They all have a better way to do it. If you're looking at the inflation statistics, inflation is down, not where perhaps we'd like it to be, but it's certainly down. Job creation has been strong in effort. I'm not an economist, and it's been a long time since those classes in macroeconomics. But as the economy has grown, it's kind of countered the efforts of the Federal Reserve Board to trim inflation. But you've got good economic indicators and on two of the key points, but people still feel they're paying more than they used to. Now, I actually think, for example, that I'm paying less for gasoline. I commuted to the University of Wyoming for all the years, tracked my gas expenses, paying less per gallon now than I was 2 years ago. Okay. But there's a lot of people who still look at, that almost $4 a gallon price and they balk at it. And so there is that perception that just isn't going away that Harris, as now the representative, or soon to be the representative of the incumbent administration, has to counter. And that's difficult to do. I think on the other big issue that's out there, abortion, that one, she's pretty much got her base established. The people who want to see states reinstitute or at least prevent some sort of federal restrictions on abortion are very much in the Harris camp. And so that's a group she simply has to mobilize. She doesn't have to convert. And that's the other big part of all of this, mobilization. You only win by voters who go to the polls. And many of the campaign rallies that we see, nobody's there to really learn about the candidate. You look at any candidate's rally now, and of course it's become very standard. Instead of having the candidate against a American flag backdrop, to have the candidate against a backdrop of their supporters waving signs. And those people have made up their minds. The idea of those rallies is to get attention locally, to spur your people to go out and vote. Nobody's there to learn what Harris or Trump has to say. They can find that out in a lot of other places.
Jim, it's fair to say that Donald Trump is not widely celebrated in Canada, at least not admittedly. His tough, sometimes belligerent stance on the North America Free Trade Agreement certainly caught a lot of Canadians by surprise. Also, his negative stand on long-term alliances like NORAD and NATO make Canadians very nervous about the world's security and our own. But this kind of tough talk on the world stage seems to gain Trump's support at home. Why do you think this is?
Interestingly, there has been a strain of the American electorate who has not liked foreign alliances, that isolationism that kept the U.S. out of World War II, if we really want to go way back for so long. There's been a strain of that. There's also this impression, of course, there's always a concern about the federal government budget and how much is being spent. And there is an image, again, impression, perception, that one of the major reasons of the budget deficit is foreign aid. Well, foreign aid is about 1% of the budget. It's not breaking the bank, but that impression is hard to get away from. And there's also been this sense, accurate or inaccurate, that the United Nations has taken advantage of the United States. That the other countries don't pay their share. We've seen this very much in the discussions, debates, controversy regarding NATO. There's a lot of concern about U.S. Not participating in NATO or withdrawing or not being as active. There's a concern about that in the United States as well. That's an issue that's dividing the electorate, but not to the extent that some other issues are. But it's an easy, thing to say at a campaign rally to get a big crowd. Going again, I've been around long enough. You can see by the gray hair that I remember earlier campaigns. In 1976, Ronald Reagan made his challenge, one of the key elements of his challenge to Gerald Ford, who was the sitting Republican president, the Panama Canal Treaty. The U.S. had been negotiating a treaty to turn control of the Panama Canal over to the Panamanians. Reagan made that a key point of his campaign. Did most Americans care about it? No. But it sounds like we're giving up something that's going to hurt our security. It's ours. We build it. It should be protected. It was amazing watching this all play out as if this was a key issue in the campaign. You pick on something like that. NATO members aren't paying their dues. Well, they are, but few people are going to go check that fact. And that works well in a campaign rally.
It's interesting you bring up Ronald Reagan because he's famous as being an actor who became president, and that really translated into his ability to speak on the stand and really win people over in sound bites on television. And today we win elections, it seems, on both sides of the border, by having some marshaling of social media, being able to talk on sound bites on Twitter and sound bites on Facebook and YouTube. And all the political groups are doing this in our country. We see a lot of this out of the United States. And it strikes me the skill set that is required to do this has really changed the profile of who would be successful in running for a high office like the presidency. And the fact that Trump talks in sound bites, and what he says half the time sounds very gruff and very vicious, but in a short sound bite, it can sound very powerful. And he also sounds the same when he's talking about international policy, like, I'm going to solve Ukraine, I can go over there and do a deal. And a lot of these things are way more complicated. There's a lot of international things that have taken years to put together and would take years to pull apart. And he makes it sound like in a soundbite he could fix it tomorrow. But it's effective politicking. How has that changed the overall, I don't know, the way that Americans talk to each other with social media in the middle of this? Is it made it more difficult to get facts over sound bites?
I think that the advent of social media has been one of the complicating aspects of campaigning. All campaigns, I mean, I've watched the evolution as the internet came into being, and the candidates who learned how to use a website did better than the candidates who were slow to do that or slow to believe that was part of what they needed. And then we saw, in particular, in 2008, Obama used the internet and social media much more effectively than other candidates. And so where it used to be your media strategy involved how you were going to put together in campaign commercials and where you were going to have them aired, is now just as much what's your social media. You know, what platforms are you on? How do you reach people through social media? And you put up very short videos that condense things. People look to that. We've known for a long time that people look for information sources that are reinforcing rather than challenging. And social media, I think, has just taken that to a higher level. There's no way to really counter someone, what was posted on Facebook, if the recipient doesn't want to be on other Facebook pages. If they only want to see the Trump Vance campaign, Facebook page, or Twitter feed or X, whatever, if that's where they want to be, they're not going to get access to that other information. And I think the kind of classic television advertising might even be fading a little bit because of that. I would be asked, how did Hillary Clinton lose to Donald Trump? Well, one of it is Trump had a much better, I think, social media presence, or at least more effective. And Trump's classic campaign advertising was much more effective. You still need to get to key audiences, and you still need to have people watch and respond to any media. And if all you do is go after the other candidate, you're going to turn people off. Okay, you can turn them off to that candidate, but you're not going to turn them on to your candidate. One of the things I think that and I would show campaign videos to my students, and I would show these ads. We saw them very much here in Colorado, but they also carried over because Southern Wyoming gets its media, a lot of its media from the Denver market as well. Trump's campaign ads were about 12 seconds of what was wrong with Hillary Clinton and 18 seconds of what's right with Donald Trump. I timed these. Clinton's were 30 seconds of what's wrong with Donald Trump. And never giving the voter a reason to come out and vote for you. Only a reason not to vote for the other one. Now, social media has an ability to do both that, what's wrong with the other and what's right with this one.
So using that same application, when you're talking about international politics, then I mean, Trump says what a great guy Putin is, and goes and has these little cuddly lunches with him, and the same thing with Kim Jong Il out of North Korea and the Chinese, and then horror of horrors, it doesn't work out the way it goes. But it's all being done by social media. It's all being done by sound bites. It's national diplomacy by sound bites, and that even stretches into his way of dealing with Canada. So, I mean, it makes us all feel very jumpy when that's the way it's at least being perceived. Whether it's actually being done that way in reality is another question.
Yeah. Well, I mean, of course, we need to look at Trump in kind of two contexts: what he did as president and what he did as candidate, because he doesn't have quite the same stage. As president, there were a lot of reported instances where there was a staff meeting at 4 o'clock in the afternoon and a decision was made and something different gets tweeted at 5 a.m. The pro-Trump media, social media, does not give much attention to those statements that would suggest a supporting of Putin. He'll go Trump's argument that he can solve the Ukrainian situation because he can talk to Putin is different than reports that he admires Putin. That's it. I'm a negotiator. Trump, that's always been part of Trump's persona politically, that I'm a negotiator. I can negotiate and get deals done. That's been from the time he launched his candidacy. That was kind of why you should support me. And he's still emphasizing that. The comments that occasionally get made that express some sort of admiration for strongman politics, whether it's a direct reference to Kim, to Putin, to Xi, whatever, those don't get replayed in the Trump world social media.
I've been involved with digital marketing and media almost since it started in the 2000s, and I've been so impressed and curious to the degree to which Harris has implemented their social media messaging campaign. It's extraordinary.
What has been interesting to me, as John just mentioned, is the fact that as a candidate, Harris had obviously been prepared to jump forward, ready to move into the campaign, to her campaign, not to the Biden-Harris campaign. Now, some of that, would be the fact that they would be prepping stuff for this time of year, getting, after the Republican convention, you're going to pick up on this or that. So people would have been getting ready for some of this. But it seems to me that Harris's team looking ahead to this possibility. Just like a vice president has to look forward to the possibility that something might happen to the president. Fortunately, it hasn't happened for many years now, but that they are now ready to take command if necessary. Well, it's almost like the Harris people view the campaign in that same way, that they understood there were liabilities with Biden, that something might happen. I'm not that much, younger than Biden. I could see the health things. They might have been looking ahead to, gee, what happens if he has a stroke? That this possibility of Biden having to drop out of the race, was in the background, and they were going to prep for it. That's the only way I can explain how fast they moved on all of this stuff.
It's been remarkable, and I will. We could talk for hours about that, but we won't. I will. Will go on.
Yeah, but it's also kind of the question is to what extent the Harris campaign is taking over the Biden campaign, or how much there was a Harris operation within the Biden/Harris operation that was ready to move forward, and that we're really not sure of.
Yes.
But I mean, we knew once Biden endorsed Harris, we knew where all the campaign consultants were going to land.
You'll note we didn't push Dr. King to talk about who he thought was actually going to win the election race coming up in November. Will it be Donald Trump? Will it be Kamala Harris? What's going to happen? It's too early to tell. It's often too early to tell in a lot of these election campaigns. It's difficult when you look at the BC election, which is coming up this fall. Who's going to win that? Well, I think at this point, if you look at the polls, the NDP is still in the lead, but who thought the BC Conservatives would rise this much? What's going to happen between now and Election Day in BC, in the United States, next year in the federal election? It's why we have elections. It isn't all done with opinion polls or even great commentaries like this. It's done because people sit at those polling booths and make up their minds, and that's the importance of democracy. So we'll certainly be following what goes on in the U.S. because, as I say, it does reflect a great deal on what happens in Canada. And before we shift off, John, we're just about ready to wrap up another Rumble Room. I want to quickly salute that great airplane that has now retired after all these years, after fighting fires in British Columbia, the Hawaii Martin Mars. Its last flight from Sprout Lake near Port Alberni all the way across the island to Pat Bay, where it's landed, and now will sit for years to come in the Aviation Museum near our Victoria Airport. And there used to be, I believe, 4 of these great big water tankers in Sprout Lake. I was a young man in the early 70s. It was my first radio job in Port Alberni. I had cousins that lived at Sprout Lake. I used to sit out in the dock and could see the giant planes out in the middle of the water, and we even went out on a motorboat once and rode around them, and they were huge, absolutely huge, built in the Second World War, and then purchased by 4 of them were purchased by the forest industry in British Columbia to go out and fight fires. Technology and, of course, advancing age is why they had to retire them one by one, and we've just said goodbye to the final one that was escorted by the Snowbirds, and got to hear the Snowbirds dive bombing on Victoria, which was just great. So a proud salute to that and a bit of history. And on that note, John, maybe again you could talk about how people can follow the Rumble Room and how they can join us and they can sign on and join our merry band.
What a great story. And, there was such an explosion of video reflecting really our society, not only how that impacts the internet, politics, but how it impacts our lives. Like, I didn't have to be there, and I could see every conceivable angle of that beautiful plane retiring on the peninsula. And it's fantastic. And so, that really lends itself well to thanking, hearing from people like Jim King. The ticking time bomb on internet and how it impacts our life is artificial intelligence and how that's going to impact politics, our lives, how we view information. And so we'll keep on top of that. And we will be learning every week on the Rumble Room what the hell is going on in the world. And I love this opportunity, and I hope you and all of our viewers feel the same way. I know that they do. We hear from them that they enjoy these conversations. So take the time, please, to watch our show and subscribe and like and share and comment on X, Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, podcast. Follow us. Do all those things. Just helps these messages get around the world as they are doing. And we so appreciate you supporting the show. So that's it for me. Once again, I'm Jani Juricic, your Croatian sensation. Big shout out. Come on, a big shout out to our Olympic athletes who've returned from Paris and have done our nation proud. So many moments when I had my hair standing up, so proud. For those who won medals, congrats. But for all of you, everybody involved, you're all champions, you're all Olympians to us, and we'll carry those titles and those experiences for the rest of our lives. Very cool.
Well said, Johnny. It's really important that we honor people that are excelling, and we have to honor excellence. We have to honor people that are putting something forth in a major way and trying to reach the top of the podium, because in many ways we're all trying to reach the top of the podium in our respective lives, and it's great that we share in these triumphs. So congratulations to the Canadian team. Doesn't matter if you won a medal, just being there, you're an Olympian for the rest of your life, and we honor you. I'm Robin Adair, and rumble on.